Welcome to Musitations, sound healing and sound wisdom for a world in need. On Musitations, we explore all things musical, meditative, and creative for healing, transformation, and awakening the relationship between nature, culture, and the soul. I'm Michael Branty Maria, and I'm your host and guide on this journey on the edge of a new millennium. I bring my 30 plus years of experience as an integrative wellness guide, best-selling author, meditation, yoga, mindfulness teacher, and a 4-time Grammy-nominated musician. Join me now on this adventure of awakening the soul. Welcome to another episode of Musitations. It's so great to have you here. And I'm really excited to have a really dear friend with me today, Felipe. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Felipe, and then we're going to jump right into it because I always feel, Felipe is one of these friends that whenever I connect with him, we just drop into that timeless now. And it's, first time we connected, it was definitely feeling like a brother from another mother. So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Felipe Munoz, and then I'm going to welcome right on. So Felipe is an award-winning artist, a 5-time entrepreneur with 20 years of experience with marketing and a decade working on business branding and consulting. He's also a meditation and mindfulness teacher and also a professional coach since 2010, who really focuses on assisting individuals on living a more mindful and meaningful life by embracing their spirituality, creativity, and exploring new positive experiences. And that connection between spirituality and creativity is one thing that Felipe and I share so deeply, and why I just think we have such a connection around this. And this is no surprise because his father actually is a fine artist and interior designer, and his mother is an educator on theology and philosophy. So again, we kind of travel creatively and conceptually and philosophically together, and it's really wonderful. So he comes from a wonderful place of combining critical thinking, compassion, and that existential drive. And he also is a father with 2 very expressive and creative children, which I'm not surprised knowing him. And another really interesting connection, I'm first generation Italian. My father was born and raised in Italy and moved here when he was 19, 20. Felipe was born in Brazil. He's Brazilian. He's a native Brazilian, and he moved to the States in 2013, which was a huge period of transition for him, and I'm going to let him share a little bit more about that. But without further ado, I want to welcome my good friend and soul brother, Felipe, onto Musitations. Welcome, Felipe.
Thank you, Michael. It's such a pleasure. I always enjoy our conversations regardless of the platform. So I feel like to have a dedicated container for this is going to be much fun for both of us.
Thank you, Peter. I agree, and it's just great. And I also, I love. We were talking about, are these toys or tools or both? We're both surrounded by, I call these my babies, and seeing your own space grow over the years in your sound meditative expression is just beautiful. And I think I want to start there and then see where it takes us. And as I've mentioned to you before, on Soulversations, this is a back and forth. So yes, I want our listeners to get to know you and find out more about you and your work. And that I have gotten so much feedback that people love the back and forth, that it's not your typical interview, but that it's a fluid, like a duet, like music. So feel free to ask me anything and to add, and we're going to see how this Soulversation blooms and unfolds. So, I first remember connecting around, and I can't remember the talk I gave, but it was, I can never remember the word because it's more complicated. What is the name of you were basically really one of the, it was one of your, I want to say it was a brainchild of yours, but I know it's something that is around the country. Can you say a little bit about that event that really spoke to me so deeply?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're talking about the PechaKucha. That's
Yeah,
why it's a hard word.
I still
It's a,
can't say it.
and it's a Japanese word for chit chat, right? So it's an interesting venue for expression, for learning in a specific way, where the methodology is like inviting people to talk um, for what was about 8 minutes, where you have like 20 slides and each slide lasts for 20 seconds. So you kind of like curating this conversation around a topic. And I was very fortunate to inherit that in 20, I think it was 2015 when I started doing that. And I did for about 4 years. I did 16 volumes of those.
Wow.
So it were like almost four per year. And and yeah, in one of them, when I wanted to just highlight like all these incredible stories we have in our community, right? And that sometimes we look at things like TED Talks, and you have like all these high specialists, and the idea of this is to create a platform where everyone can be, intertwined and entangled. So bringing you talking about music and creativity and spirituality, well, with all your accolades and your experience, and then you also have like this like young artist that is just coming out of college talking about his life experiences uh, and accolades and the struggles through life. It gives so much inspiration to people, and I think that that's what resonated to me, like knowing that that event was not happening here in Pensacola. I wanted to have something like that because I wanted to just attend events like that. And I'm on the I'm on this mindset that like if you don't find it, you build it. If you cannot see things happening, you make it happen. So that was one of the many things that I try to create here in Pensacola after moving, like say uh, from Brazil, from like a huge city, from a megalopoly like São Paulo. Um, that changed completely my lifestyle. And I was trying to find what was the best of both worlds, like intertwining that cultural community and the same way trying to connect, right, with artists, with the creatives, with the people that I love to be around and I want to be inspired by. So it was kind of like an excuse also to connect with those people that I admire from a distance, but then I could bring closer to me. And I'm very fortunate that friendships like ours sparked from that venue.
That's beautiful. And I have to say that one of the things I've really admired about you and watched is that you are not only a builder of community, you just have a natural gift for that, but what I consider social artistry, because this is also the ability to create community around creativity. And I've watched you do this in a number of venues in our area. And I have tremendous respect for that. And I did some of my own versions at times, but I really know how hard or challenging it can be to have that. And I really saw, I think this was also something that really drew me to you and your work is what I call selfless service. I could see you really, your love of people, your love of the creative process, your love of bringing people together. And it really came through. And also, I mean, you know, I have made connections through that connection. And because I've got a few years on you and kind of downriver a bit, but you really helped me connect with some of the younger community here in a really beautiful way. And I want to thank you for that. And it was really, really profound. So I think that this is a really beautiful thing where too, and this is a theme I see and comes up a lot in Musitations is I posted this quote. I cannot remember. It's a Frenchman who wrote it. I should have that down, but I'm not taking credit for it. But the quote is, nobody knows everything, but everyone knows something no one else knows. And it's this idea of unique perspective. And almost when you were talking about you know, the beauty of connection of all of these gifts that people are able to share through an event like that. And I did love that it was short, 8 minutes, 20 slides for 20 seconds. It it makes sure everybody gets a voice, and it's almost, and I know we're both influenced by meditative practices like Buddhism and other meditative practices, but in particular in Buddhism, the idea of codependent arising, that everything's arising and interconnected like an ecosystem or an old growth forest. And that event kind of felt like an old growth forest. It really, diversity, plurality were built into it. And,
Hmm.
and I really love that. So I really makes me think about the Amazon in Brazil, which so which which I want to get into, but I want to move to the next strong memory I have of you is I remember this coming through my email, and I didn't know it was you when I first, it was like, art is meditation, come and paint as a meditative practice. And I was like, oh, I want to sign up, because I'm a wannabe visual artist. I swim in music and poetry and writing, but I always say, one day if I really, really retire, I want to get an MFA in abstract acrylic painting. It's always whether or not, and actually watching. So I click on it, and here's Felipe's beautiful face, and you're doing this wonderful, and just the description of it, the way you described it. And it was, I think, around abstract acrylic. So it was kind of like, and I wanted to make it to that class so many times, and it was just on a day and time I couldn't. But I remember reaching out to you and just kind of, number one, kudos. Number two, I want to do this. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of time. And this is, I think, this is the core message of Musitations, because Musitations doesn't just mean music, musitations, all the muses. So the musings, the way we follow the creative energy, which to me is kind of like, Eros, it's almost like the life force itself. And when we align ourselves with that energy, the two things I like to say is what creator's doing all the time is creating. When we're creating, we're putting ourselves in alignment with that fundamental creative process of the entire universe. And so many people think of meditation as sitting on the cushion, and there's nothing wrong. I've been doing that for 40 years, and I'm very grateful for my Zen practice and all of that. And it's very hard for a lot of people, number one, to meditate to silence. Number two, to not do. And I think one thing that I really try to help support people in, which I know you do too, is that the creative process in and of itself can be the most powerful meditation. So I just want to open that up and have you share anything, maybe inspiration for those workshops, and anything you want to share about your process, because I see you first and foremost as an artist, actually, but then I also see this teacher and meditation teacher. So I would love for you to respond to all of that in any way that you feel called. I know I put a lot out there.
No, and I appreciate that because um, those are the little reminders of how I got where I am, right? Sometimes I don't stop to think about that process. My mindfulness, in a sense, has that um, part of it. You're so in trail on the now that sometimes you don't stop to think about, like, the planning or the past, and those are also important parts of it. That's why I say mindfulness is a stepping stone. It's the beginning of every practice. Um, but to go to the point of how did all that started is just an interesting um, journey for myself, because I never thought that I was gonna jump into this role of like teaching meditation or teaching mindfulness, teaching art in any sense, because those are just like my private practices that people were asking about, and I was like, well, let me show, let me try to curate like what will be that environment. Um, so in that sense, I think it was 2016 when I started renting a studio space at First City Art Center, which is the only community art center here in town. And they had these different exhibitions where I was putting performances on, like I was painting and like, or having an open studio and painting. And painting to me, I'm not a good illustrator. I'm not a good fine artist per se, and I have all my background, professional background in design, and in that sense, my idea of things can be perfect, and I just need a computer to make them perfect. Perfect in being in alignment with a briefing, and like resulting in an outcome that is aligned with what a client wants, even if that client is me. I can take a photograph if I need a perfect picture, like, and things like that. So when it comes to art, to me, it's just like this is a space where the canvas is blank, and I just want to be pure expression of whatever is flowing through me. It's almost like a channel to not only my emotions, but how my emotions and feelings, my psyche connect with this super consciousness that is around us. And just allowing myself to be open to whatever is that expression without abiding to a style, technique, or color palette, whatever it is. It's like, what do I have around me that can become expressive? So people would, you know, constantly ask, like when I'm painting or watching what I was painting, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you painting? What is this? And I was like, what do you see? What is that this like, talks through to you? To me, painting and art in general, it's a dialogue. It's a constant dialogue. It just doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to you. It's something that is in the ether of interpretation and connection that goes beyond what we even understand as the is capable by the human mind, right? Um, so anyway, that fascinated me, and because people were asking so much, I was like, you know what? I talked with the event coordinator. Let's put up a class there, and we can do a meditation prior to painting. But the idea is to demystify what is that process of both the meditation and the painting. So for the first year, those classes were 2 hours long, sometimes 3 hours long. You would have a 10 to 15-minute meditation at the beginning. And my intention, both spiritually and psychologically, was to get people on the same wavelength, kind of like connect with the stars, if you will, and bring that energy into the flow of what is necessary, leaving out the door everything that they don't need. And then challenging them through the process to the point that I was mentioned at the beginning. This is just abstract expressionism. If I see you painting like an object or like having like a line of thought that is too consistent, I'm going to give you a different color. I'm going to give you a different tool,
Mm,
because the idea behind it is to challenge you to think in different ways and find flow through that process, not to be on your comfort zone. Uh, and that was what was really interesting, because you're stressing to a point, right? You're stressing the canvas and stressing yourself, but not to a point of burnout, but to a point of creative flow, where whatever you're creating at this moment in the beginning, the first 30 minutes, is going to be completely different from like an hour and a half later on, because the materials are not going to dry in time enough, and you are working over and over again. But the idea was exactly that, to not be a painting with a twist, if you
mm,
might. You're not trying to achieve this result. You're
yes.
just enjoying the process itself, enjoying that journey. And I think it was really successful with that. It was actually what led me into expanding into like, what are other ways of integrating creativity into people's lives, and led me after that to study more of positive psychology on my MBA, so I could integrate more of like what is that flow, the mindfulness, this strength use that helps people to transcend what they are experiencing this moment. Because the idea behind what I do now as like stress management goes is not that we are getting rid of stress, but we're channeling what we understand as stress
Mm.
into a creative flow that we are able to tackle and emerge into different ways. So to me, all those things that I'm talking about, from like business development, um, art making, meditation, fatherhood, those are spiritual practices. To me, this is what life is about, is how we integrate this faith that we have in ourselves and hope to the mankind and manifest that into how we act in this world. And I think that finding creative ways of allowing ourselves to take that time, it buffers um, that cloud of um, intermittent negative um, procrastination and stuckness and just like all these feelings that makes us feel like held back by whatever is. And it dissipates that, dissolves that, because we allow those things to be expressed fastly and constantly in different ways. And in a personal manner, that's kind of how I end up getting more into not music per se, but like sound making and meditation through that, because I was finding myself with less and less time for painting and expressing myself that way, but I was still longing for those moments. So I found ways that the response is more immediate. I don't need to prep or set a lot, and now that's where I migrated my uh, my performance, if you will, and creating a space that feeds into that also allows me now to teach people that and show you don't need to be call an artist to paint and to make art. You don't need to be a musician to make what people call music. All that you need is to like let your soul flow through your actions.
Mm. Mm. Let your soul flow through your actions. That's beautiful. Just beautiful. Um, and it connects to my soul name and my book Ever Flowing On, to that flow. And you mentioned flow a number of times, and thank you for all of that, Felipe. I love to say it's about the current, not the content, the process,
Mhm,
not the product.
mhm,
And to me, this is part of this growing evolution and revolution on the planet of taking back creativity as our God-given right, as one of the most sacred divine faculties of being human. Because in the last, I'd 8, 9, 10,000 years, kind of the process of what we call civilization or culture, which is actually, there was all kinds of civilization and culture going on before what we call agrarian society. When we move from hunter-gatherer subsistence level to city states, and all of a sudden the hierarchical cultures that emerged out of that. And it even starts, I think, with when you cultivate the land instead of following, the caribou or the buffalo, or looking where the berries are. Because in nomadic existence and more shamanic traditions, the idea was everyone, they didn't even have a word for art or musician or anything. Everyone was seen as part of, in fact, it supported the tribe to dance and sing and make stories and create. The Blackfoot are one of the few tribes, they would paint their dreams on their teepees, and it was a richness of staying in connection with each other, the land, the animals, the plants, and it actually informed them too, not to mention kept them healthy. And part of what's happened in a more stratified hierarchical culture is that we've given creativity to, quote, the professionals. And it comes down, you actually also talked about perfect and, like making, a photograph and, the difference for you between design and creativity. I'm reminded the origin of the word perfect, which in Western culture or Greco-Roman roots meant to be without flaw. I mean, that particular aesthetic we've been suffering under for 2,500 years. And it doesn't exist. Perfection doesn't exist. And one of the original meanings of perfect actually meant to be thorough, not to be without flaw. And so this is what I try to do too, is that, in fact, a lot of my music that has done the best and has moved people the most, I composed it in here in a very makeshift studio after Hurricane Ivan. And I can hear every quote in perfection. And I didn't even want to release it because I was surviving having been displaced from our home and not having the usual equipment I'd have. And yet my soul was just calling to express this grief, this pain, but also this mystery and this curiosity of what was happening for me in this 4-year transition that turned out to be this album Ocean. And it had nothing to do with, I never thought about awards or money. It was literally, I was hanging by my fingertips and trying to give form to something, and emotions and feelings that were too big for words. And I think one of the reasons it has found such a powerful place in many people's hearts is because it is kind of raw and unpolished and untamed, and what might be called wrong notes might pop out, but it was perfectly wrong because it was actually expressive of that. And it reminds me also, have heard so many wonderful things about your classes, the arts meditation, and how it's touched people and moved people. And it reminded me because I have no training as a visual artist at all. I think I took one drawing class, which I loved. But I remember reading an interview with an Australian artist and reading this phrase by her when she said she finally threw away her art education and she learned to paint from an Aborigine who told her to go to the canvas like a blind beggar knowing nothing. Go to the canvas like a blind beggar knowing nothing. And that gave me the courage. You've seen, I play around with some of these abstract acrylics, but I also know I don't have as much courage to go there into the unknown as I do with music or a sound. And I love what you talked about, because part of what I heard you say is you are helping support people in moving deeper and deeper into their unknowing and trusting something more visceral, more fundamental, more primary. And to me, this is what heals. It's what, often I tell people, meditation is not what you think. In fact, my whole goal is to get people out of their heads, right? And that's why I do a lot of somatic meditation practices, because to move people into their body, into whether it's sound or movement. So anyway, those are some thoughts I had that really, really touched me, and open to any thoughts around that. But I also know, and because I know we can talk on and on and on, I do want to bring up, and just because I've mentioned the Amazon, I've mentioned you being Brazilian, and that I feel like, there's ways in which, you just literally could be probably a genetic brother at some level. And it's like oftentimes looking in a mirror of myself, years ago, in terms of your ability to synthesize all these different interests and activities. And it's just so beautiful. But I'm curious about your and Brazil keeps popping up in so many synchronicities for me. So, when I went to film school, like three or four of my fellow cohort who were from Brazil, and I find the Brazilian spirit, and I don't want to reduce this, and uh, to anyway, I don't really know what I'm asking, but I want to first honor the Brazil as the country of your origin, but also I never visited. I don't know enough about it, but I also know that there seems to be an openness, a embodiedness, a creativity, and that I'm curious about how a land and a language influences a culture.
Hmm.
So I would be curious about anything you'd like to share about how you feel or don't feel that you being Brazilian and that culture and that land and that language and that people has influenced this particular very beautiful, unique way that you move through the world, or doesn't.
Okay, I think it does. It does highly because it was what gave me the opportunity to be who I am, and appreciate things um, in a different perspective. There's just beginning with language, if you will. Um, I speak Portuguese, I speak English, I speak Spanish. I read in French, and I just love world music in general. So I'm always listening to everything from the Balkans to Germany, to indigenous music and all sorts of mix that comes in between that. And I've been doing that since a young age. So I think that helped to form a different way that I structure things around language, because I remember being a kid and just making up my own, and talking with myself like I was talking a different language. Um, and when it comes to the belief on afterlife, even or past lives, I think that is even more correlated with like who I am. So I chose to be born in Brazil,
Mm.
and in the family that I was born. I chose to go through different struggles through life, but also to understand the privileges that I had. And through the life and the conversations with my parents, through my religious upbringing, um, or like I mentioned, like through the language that we talk. When I was 8 or 9, like I got invited to write a poetry book by with the principal in the school that I was, because they were really excited about how I was expressing myself and whatnot. My mom said no. She's like, no, he's not prepared for that. Like, this is not the time for it. At this time and age, now I understand that one could have been a scam. Could have been like, hey, it only cost this much for him to be. But I remember how that upset me in a sense of like, well, I have a way of expressing myself, like why is that not valued? But that persisted in different manners, which made me look into how I expand my vocabulary so I could talk more. So, in a sense of feeling like I wasn't prepared or I wasn't good enough to do that, kind of motivated me to then study more literature, study more language, study more art, and those things that kind of like could bring together how I could express myself, or help others express themselves. Um, Being raised by a fine artist, right? In that sense, it helped me because I was going every other year to the biannuals in São Paulo, or going to vernissages and gallery openings, and communing with this world that translates into visual aspects, something that we only feel, right?
Mm.
So that also helped to build what was my language around that. In Brazil, it is a land of diversity from the beginning. Even if you think about the indigenous tribes that were there before, and it was this very segregated in a way, but also very connected across country. And now the way we were colonized with all the destruction and all things was still a way that they integrated the different cultures around what Catholicism was. And because of that, there is a spiritual embrace of different cultures and creativity around how one express themselves religiously too. And I see that present in how I approach life. So there is a cultural significance in how I chose to be in the land that I see as sacred, although we're defiling it and destroying it so many different ways, caused by, I think, what it comes, this capitalistic pursuit of profit over whatever it is that we do. So if you think about like anything, like say, it becomes a profession, becomes a product, we're looking for perfection in those manners, and we do not enjoy the connection that is created around them. Um, I think that in Brazil, we need to find those connections. If we don't find those connections as we are growing up there, you're kind of left aside. Those connections are important because the majority of people there are entrepreneurs. They need to be, because there's not enough support or not enough employment. There's too many people, and there's it's a lot of condensated population in specific areas. So the only way to really find a way to live is by finding creative ways around how you live, being how you open the business, what type of business you're going to open, being how you express yourself physically with your clothes or in your groups that you are in and whatnot. But it's just really interesting to connect with that, and understanding like the parts that make us whole are the parts of everything that surrounds us. So that's where I see as like how Brazil truly influenced me. It's a different culture, it's a different language, and I struggle with that even when I write in English, because it's so much more flourish, and I can see for how long I'm talking here, how much I've become redundant at some point, and it's part of the poetry, it's part of um, this links that we make with the language that we talk, because I'm not translating in my head, I'm just kind of like flowing with whatever language I'm available at. I expanded my vocabulary, and I think that's what we all can do, and it helps us to express ourselves better, because sometimes it's not what we're talking about or how we're talking about. It's just that we don't understand what we want to communicate to begin with.
Beautiful, Felipe. Beautiful. No, and I couldn't agree more, because again, even as although I'm a retired psychologist now, but as practicing, therapist for over 30 years, same thing we were just talking about with art, that when I'm listening to someone, to me, I'm trying to listen to the current more than the content. And that the current, that language itself is an art, is a music, is a musing. And I think this is a really big piece, is both when we are speaking from and listening from the heart, we're able to express these more inexpressible things that actually are what gives life its meaning. I always say that, the mind is a great tool and wonderful tool, and yet it cannot confer meaning. All science cannot confer meaning. It can give you a lot of ability to move through the world and maneuver and manipulate things and change things, and solve a lot of difficult problems around survival and other things. And yet the only thing that can confer meaning is the heart, which is the emotions, the feeling quality is what confers meaning. And without meaning, we can live a very dry as dust existence. And I think we are in an incredible global crisis of meaning. And it was the time when religion supplied that. But now it's like we're having to find and explore how each of us individually must find this meaning based upon what speaks to our heart. Not because authority has told us, but because in my in my training, my tradition is that sense of, part of the vision fasting, vision questing, or any kind of a soul initiation for me is learning what you are willing to die for. What is it that has that ultimate meaning for you, which helps move into that. And I do think there's something about the Latin languages that are much more languages of the heart. And we could go into this a lot, but for now, just because we don't have a lot of time, you shared so many beautiful things, and we could go with it. Again, it's like an old growth forest. We could go anywhere, but it leads me to want to also kind of bring us into kind of focus of how we may want to bring this into a close, and also to maybe give some wonderful tips or messaging to the listeners that are tuning in with us right now. And that is that coming from an Italian background, you be coming from a Brazilian background, and the Romance language of Portuguese, the languages of the heart. I mean, the Romance languages are called Romance languages for a reason. The languages of the heart, and that there is more a capacity to express feeling in a lot of the Romance languages that I do think flavors a culture. Now, I want to, though, bring this into, because there is, I think, one of the wonderful things about English is it does have some objectivity, and it's much more objective in lots of ways. It has a little more Germanic origin in that way. And yet the other point you brought up, which I feel like is so important, and I know a lot of the listeners out there, you may not even have money for a canvas or for a keyboard or for anything. And that when you said to be creative, even if you're trying to carve out a living for yourself, and this is the essence of what I would like to get to, is that part of the essence of creativity for me is, we talked about getting out of your head, but also generating possibility. The idea of the possible, the idea of trusting, try on, whether it's different mindsets, or I almost like to think of it as it's a heart set, or kind of like being able to me, it's very much going into a reverie kind of state, where Einstein talked about this so often, that wherever you are out there listening, whatever you may or may not have at your disposal, the way you can walk through your room right now can be creative by moving differently, walking differently. When you go, and I love doing this, even if I'm in the shower, like standing differently, playing with your toes, moving around, and I think this is why children are such a great, they're masters at a playful, I always say, yes, creativity that we're talking about is play, and yet you should be playing with the seriousness of a child at play. Now, that doesn't mean it means to take your play seriously. It means to move into this space of such profound curiosity, such profound sensitivity to your body, to your environment, that you cannot help but be creative. So I would love for you perhaps to leave our listeners with, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 tips of when you are working with people to help them open to being more creative in a situation where they may not have the toys or tools we do, to be able to partake, because to me, creativity is a sacrament, and that gets me choked up. And because it teaches us how to live, and even perhaps more importantly, how to survive. I have to say this last piece of this. What I was taught with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that you have to have your survival needs, and at a very top, then you can play art and music, etc. My parents taught me this. Oh, you cannot make a living as an artist musician. And by the way, I do better with my music now than I ever did in psychology. But I didn't aim at that. I don't think you can aim at that. I think you lose what's most precious about it. But when I was on working with my Blackfoot teachers and some of the Blackfoot elders, there was actually one who, his mother was the one that Maslow stayed with when she was at the when he went to explore the Blackfoot's work and creativity, etc. And when she saw, in fact, his pyramid is taken from a teepee, the image of a teepee.
Mm.
And when she read what he wrote, she said, "He got it all. He screwed it all. He got it backwards." And their idea, again, going back to a nomadic lifestyle, when there was no food, when there was no water, when the survival was at risk, that's when they would dance and sing. And that was the way they fed themselves. They fed their souls with spirit because they lived on spirit to get through the next day. And so that's why it's so important to me, and I'm so passionate about taking creativity away from the professionals. I'm not saying that not to emulate and explore that, but that this is a sacrament. This is a human right to be creative, even if it's the way you might be paralyzed, but the way you might move your one finger that you can move. So I think of Stephen Hawking, and that man defied all odds. He should have, died in 18 months, and he lived decades being able to move a couple fingers because his mind was creating and seeing universes and understanding the origin of universes, and that's what kept him alive. So, sorry, you kind of got me all inspired and
It's
passionate.
okay. That's what
So,
this is about.
it is. So, I watch you work with people in the community all the time, and people love you here, and the way you touch them, and so I would love you to have the final words about what you suggest to be creative if you don't have what appears to be tools at your disposal to be creative.
I appreciate that, and it's beautifully say how you put in, and I think that there's a way to concatenate everything together here now, because you mentioned before also, like doing the art and meditation is a way of working and getting people deeper and deeper into this state, not only of flow and reflection, but in touch with themselves. And I think that most often the people that don't see themselves as creatives are the most creatives because they're not exercising and exerting that. They have that just like they're ready to come out, and that is surprising. Um, like you say, it's part of human nature, of the sacredness of who we are, to be creative. We create all the time, and our ideas, our dreams, our wills and wants, those are creations, and people tend to narrow it to the artist's path, right? And that's not what it is. You can be a coder and be creative on how you express yourself and code and solve problems. And I think that's where I I bring this back into how I coach and how I talk with individuals. It's finding creative ways, not because I'm telling you how to do it, but because you can then explore internally how you are navigating around what you thought was a challenge before, you know. So I think the best way that we can connect with that, both the sacred ground, and explore what we have around us, even when we don't have anything. It's going back to the earth itself.
Mm.
So there's this Brazilian artist. His name is Vic Muniz. He does this amazing, gigantic art pieces using trash or using leftovers like of debris from constructions and whatnot. And you can only see that from like a higher perspective. So it's very interesting how he uses that. And he started doing that in Brazil, going to landfills and asking people to help him, like creating these huge images. Um, like you can see him replicating the Mona Lisa, just using trash that's found on a landfill. Um, we don't need to go to that dimension in a sense, but I want to just express that there are ways of working around anything that you have, is how you are navigating your environment and creating what you want to see from it. And sometimes you see better with your eyes closed because you are then getting in touch with different emotions, feelings, sensations that sometimes we don't care about. So I would suggest like people should just go outside, close their eyes while they sit down on the ground and touch the ground with their hands and just allow to feel the dirt, the sand, the grass, and with your hands creating something, a gesture, a movement, digging into it and feeling that connection with the earth that creates back, that the seeds sprout from. So it's almost this exchange of energy coming back and forward. And at the same time, that is your canvas. That is your sacred body. That is the caressing of, the gentle touch to a mother.
Mm.
And when you connect with that energy, you bring back to you, through your hands, through your chakra system, through your energy, even if you do not believe in any of the spiritual aspect, you are enjoying this connection just because your neuroreceptors are then connecting with the subtle aspects of touch that bring you joy, that bring you peace of mind, that take you away from like all these concerns and things that are maybe floating on, and connect back with the energy that you are putting into the earth itself. And when you finish, what you see there might not seem like anything, but if you put a little bit of imagination into it, might be the answer that you were looking for into the art itself. It becomes that dialogue again. It becomes like that force of expression that gives back to you in a way that it opens your mind.
Oh, I love that, Felipe. That's just so beautiful. And I just had, as you were speaking, I had so many images and memories coming back. I guided these vision fasts for 10 years where I would take folks out on the land and having gone through them myself. And I cannot tell you how many times myself fasting on the land and hungry and having very little energy, and how many times I would just sit on the earth and trace my fingers through the dust, the sand, the grass. It was a little practice we'd make where you take a foot by foot square and spend hours with it, watching and learning from that little square of the creatures that might pass through it, the ants and the bugs, quote, the bugs. And thank you for bringing us back into the first canvas, our Mother Earth skin. That was beautiful. Thank you. And I could see, I could see you and I guiding it like a little day long. We call them medicine walks, but they could be medicine art. We go out
Mhm.
and allow people to. There's a few artists, I'm blocking on their names right now, that are they do these temporary installations by, doing something with the natural setting, and then that doesn't interfere and actually just adds beauty, and then it goes back to the earth, and only with natural materials that are, rocks and pine cones and branches.
Mhm.
So anyway, this has been such a delight. We've talked about doing this for probably over a year, and it was perfect timing, of course, in not in without flaw timing, but in the sense of it was so timely to have a chance to spend time with you. And I know we
Thank you.
might have to have you on again because there's just so much richness to our connection. Before we finish, please, I would love you to share with the audience how people could get in touch with you, learn about more what you do. So how can people find out more about your work?
Sure. So right now, I'm the founder and COO of Empathic Practice. It's a wellness clinic here in Pensacola, where we focus really on stress management. So people can find not only my services, but all the other practitioners that are involved here at empathicpractice.us. I say .us, but it's .us. That was my
Oh, I like
intention.
that. I like that.
Um, And if you go on YouTube and look for empathic practice, Pensacola, or meditations, or just empathic practice, you're going to find some of our meditations and content there also. It's a good way to connect. Um, I'm available on both those channels, so direct messages come directly to me. And I'll be more than happy to expand on these conversations with you, with anyone who reaches out, because it's really my pleasure is to get to know people, to understand, to connect, and to nourish those relationships for what they are. If they are 1 second, if they are one lifetime, it doesn't matter. What matters is the moment that we are having that. And I'm so deeply appreciative of being in this. I see you as a mentor. I admire your work, and I'm so happy that I not only on your radar, but we became part of each other's life, because it was through our conversations that inspired me that was possible to do what I'm doing now.
Mm.
And I hope that the conversations that we have can inspire others to see all the things that we can do in, like you mentioned, this world revolution that we're living in, finding meaning within ourselves and meaning that raises the vibration of this world as
Mm. Thank you, Felipe, for all those words, and so honored by your words. And I feel the same way. And I've always loved when I first saw empathic practice. It's such a great phrase because there's so many layers to it. And you truly practice empathy, and it's such an honor because as a deep empath, both being deep empaths and being men, empaths have been casualties at other periods of time in culture and can be today, and that you find such a skillful way of living as a very open-hearted male in this world, and yet very competent and capable and resilient and strong. And it's part of what I call being a heart warrior. And you truly are a heart warrior. When you're one of the people I think of as far as that this man is a true heart warrior. And so it's such an honor, and I look forward to many more conversations and adventures together. And thank you
well.
so much for being on Musitations today. And listeners, thanks as always for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you next time on Musitations. You've been listening to Musitations, sound healing and sound wisdom for a world in need, where we explore all things musical, meditative, and creative for healing, transformation, and awakening the soul. I've been your guide and host, Michael Brandt DeMaria. Feel free to check out my music on Pandora, Amazon Music, Spotify, XM Sirius Radio, or Soundscapes Cable. You can also check out my website at michaeldemaria.com or online programs at alldaypeace.com, alldaypeace.com. Listen to your heart, follow your soul, and we'll see you on the next episode of Musitations.